Hello, dancers. So, today we're going to be talking about how to use long spaces in our benefit. So, we're mostly dancing at home, right? We don't have this typical setup that's happening. So, when I say long spaces, I mean it's like an alley. So, my kitchen, when you look at my kitchen, it goes like this. It's very narrow, but it's long, right? So, other spaces that may be this way is your hallway. It could be at the foot of your bed, along the front of your bed, right? Or we have my son's bed is right smack dab in the room, and he has the free space around the bed. It looks like a U shape, but it's pretty narrow along each side of the bed as well as at the foot of the bed. So that's what I'm talking about, like these narrow but longer spaces. One of the other, I know this may seem weird, but one of the other places that may seem more long and narrow is your driveway. And I know you're like, why would I do my driveway? I dance outside, y'all. Like if I'm wearing tennis shoes and I go out for a walk and I come back, I'm like, oh, there's a drive. There's so much space here for me to dance, right? I don't think about, oh, it's got to be 5 foot by 5 foot or 10 foot by 10 foot or anything like that. I kind of, when I have dedicated dance space, I do my best to set up something that's more permanent because it allows me to optimize my movement and train my body differently to move based on what's happening around me. That being said, if you're not aware of how to set up that space, one of my videos, the YouTube videos I've had before, is how to dance in small spaces from a long time ago, but it's a great YouTube video about even how to manipulate around your living room and furniture and stuff like that. It's actually pretty fun. But today we're going to be talking about those small and narrow, or I'm sorry, narrow and long spaces, which is going to be really important. And the reason why I wanted to talk with you about this today was because a lot of the time, you're in those kinds of spaces, but it feels limiting, like, oh, well, let me go out here and I'll do it over here instead. But I want to suggest that you could get a lot out of really honing in on those narrower and longer spaces. So some of the movements that you can do, which are really helpful, are traveling movements that don't require a lot of side to side range of motion. So you can actually do that, and I'll show you how to manipulate it. But as an example, arabesque, right? We typically apply it in such a way where we zigzag across the floor like this as you move forward or as you move back. Now, depending on the width of your space, that may or may not work, right? So you would alter your movement, and I'm going to show you how to do that even with movements seemingly too wide to do, but you can see how that can be a challenge. Okay, versus movement that may be a step tap, which you can do really up and down like a hallway. Really, you don't need much width. So when I talk about the width, I mean you don't have to go too far out of your frame or out of this width right here, because sometimes that's really all you have. Like I don't have a wide hallway, so really this is the space that I have, just enough for two people to go through the hallway, but not even shoulder by shoulder. Like we'd have to be stacked. So this is how one of those things came about. Even the corridor of your front door. Like I try and find dance spaces anywhere. So one of those movements that you can do is a step tap, like I talked about, right? This movement here. So you're like, oh, I could do this movement all the time. But what I want to suggest to you is that you don't have to keep it the typical step tap that you see. The goal is to optimize the space coming front and back. So if I'm minimizing how much I go side to side, then what I can start to do is play with how can I get different movements, but not going side to side. You know what I'm saying? So with the step tap, what you can do is start turning in the middle of your step tap. So what I'm doing is I'm placing my foot down wherever it happens to land as I pivot around. and I'm not stuck on the idea that I should be turning one way or the other. You're really just playing to get used to manipulating your body, because when you start dancing and really feeling the music, you're not going to be so much like, oh, I turned this way, so now I have to finish it out. No, what you're really doing is you're training your body to be able to just go with the flow and follow its momentum without resisting what's happening, right? So as you play with this, you can see that if my hallway is the side of this canvas, which I wish it was this wide, what I would do is I would stay within this canvas depth right here, and I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But you can see that this is all step tap, and I'm right here. I'm not going outside of this canvas width, right? And even narrower. I'm just staying right about here. So step tap is one of those movements that you can manipulate in order to do it. One of the other movements that you can do is a simple cross, open, 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 which is, by the way, another version of a step tap. Step, tap, step, tap, step, tap, step, tap. So let's say you're doing this movement right here and you're like, man, how can I really use this movement? But I can't go this wide because literally you don't even have that much room, right? The span of your leg. This is how you're going to start to shift it. You'll have cross, tap, and then you'll have step, out. So you're still going to keep the same cross, tap out, cross, open out, but you're going to pivot it to where you will be on a diagonal. So instead of rotating around like we did with the step tap, what you're going to do is you're just going to pivot to keep it on a diagonal, because your purpose is to travel completely down, still facing one direction, right? So instead of cross, open, cross, open, cross, open, cross, open, you'd have cross, open, cross, open. But you'd still have that same footing, but now you'd be rotating at the hip to get that narrower space in your movement versus out here. You see how that changes? I'm more stacked front to back. So we're going to do that again. So you have cross, open, cross, open, cross, open, cross, open. Now if we go backwards, cross, open. I want you to cross, open back behind you versus out to the side. So you're going to open back here versus even pivoting the body to face it. So there's just so many ways you can dance within a narrow front. This is another great way if you happen to be a performer or an entertainer and you're gigging a lot, for really narrow spaces between tables. I would do this all the time in between chairs that people are sitting in, and you literally have this much space. You're like, my ass isn't that narrow. So I'm like constantly dancing on the side, which sometimes was a challenge too, because my ass isn't that narrow. So like I would be manipulating my space and my movement to accommodate in between chairs, which I got really good at. And then I practice at home because it can feel like a very familiar place. So I would have cross, open, cross, but then you have this back movement that's happening, and this is reminiscent of this movement. Ba ah ba ah ba ah ba ah ba ah ba ah. Cross, open, 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 cross, open. So you can see how I start to manipulate my movement to make it more narrow, but still really exciting. And of course, you can layer anything on top of that. So now let's talk about that one movement I told you that it is seemingly very wide in its movement and application, but you can manipulate it to make a difference, right? So I love arabesques. I love it, love it, love it. I think they're beautiful movement. So here's a couple of things that you can do. So as a reminder, arabesque is ha, boom, boom, ha, boom, boom, ha. And you can see how wide I'm taking this movement, right? So what you really want to take away from that is, how can I keep the dynamic of the musicality, but just make the movement smaller, right? But not less energy, just physically take up less space. So one of those things is to not have your leg fully extended out. Have it gently drag behind your body and step small. Boom, boom, 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 small. Because you're still, what their people are paying attention to is up here. Ha, boom, boom, ha, boom, boom, ha, boom, boom, ha, boom, boom, ha. Right? So you don't have to have this full length show that's happening in the legs. Okay. The other way you do it is by shifting your orientation. So what I mean by that is typically we see a hallway or we see an alley kitchen, like I was telling you about, and you see that the motion should be the longest distance, right? You think that it should be at one end of the hallway to the other. I just don't find it like that all the time. What I'm like, what happens if I shift and now my motion, my travel, my depth is now this, right? But my side to side movement is longer, right? Because we think seemingly this is the only direction we should dance. No. And like I was saying, for those of you who gig, you'll know that when you face people or they're in back of you and you dance with them this way, it has a different impact than when you dance with them this way with your side that you're traveling through. But I would dance in gigs and like private events and all of this stuff with my movement side to side here as I traveled down the length because I had to just work the space, right? So how does this translate to arabesque? You know you only have this far. So what's going to happen is as you step through, so I'm going to come towards you. I know I only have this wide. Let's say it's still the width of the canvas. So I would still go, ha, doom, doom, ha. And then instead of this leg, I'm going to walk it through so you see. 1, step, step, arabesque. Typically, we would take this leg and cross back front. But instead of that, I'm going to just place it down. We were here, step, step, ha, step, step, ha. And I'm going to repeat that sequence. So imagine that the hallway is now this way, right? So instead of me looking at you, I'm going to be here. So I'm going to show you how it looks from the side so you actually can see the length. So imagine that it's the width of the canvas, now this way, right? And then the length is all the way down. So now I have from one side to the next how you're going to go with your shoulder facing the long side of the hallway or the alley, your pathway. 5, 6, 7, and arabesque. Doom, doom, arabesque. Doom, doom, arabesque. Doom, doom. Does that make sense? Arabesque. Boom, boom, 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 arabesque. And all I did was allow the floating leg to now be in the lead. Yeah. So when you're thinking about this way or this way, use these pivoting techniques. Boom, pivot, pivot, turn any way you want, or cross, open, cross, back, or changing the front so that way you can make your space work. Okay? I hope this is helpful, especially for those of you who don't have a dance space in a studio, but you're really just working in your home, which is most of us. So when you're doing it, think about, how can I make this work for me? How can I make this work for me, right? Versus, I can't do it. Because if you think you can't do it, you won't. But if you're like, how can I make this work for me? You're going to figure out something that makes it still usable for you and you can still dance. We don't want any of this crap in the way to stop you from moving your body. All right? Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I think it's so important for you to get any of these obstacles out of your way so you can just keep moving your body. All right? Have a beautiful day, everybody.